Everybody. It's Scott Fairchild, Executive Director of the DSCC. Really appreciate everybody taking the time to get on today with three leading lights in our party, Senator Elizabeth Warren, MJ Hegar, and Mayor Adrian Perkins. Really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today. Before I turn it over to Senator Warren, just wanted to give everybody a quick overview of the larger map. 97% of the Republican spending is on defense right now. We've got them on their heels. And our candidates are taking it to them around healthcare. We were doing this pre-pandemic. And if you think expanding Medicaid or protecting people with pre-existing conditions was a good idea pre-pandemic, you can bet it's an even better idea now. We've had 13 races be upgraded in our direction just in the last 2 months. And the DSCC is involved in more voting rights legislation than any other organization in the country right now, protecting the right to vote for Americans all over the country. So I want to remind folks that you can go to elizabethwarren.com to get involved, help candidates, help folks as we work here to flip the Senate. And with that, I want to turn it over to Senator Elizabeth Warren. Really appreciate you and your team organizing this for us, ma'am.
Oh, delighted to do it. So thank you so much, Scott, for the introduction and for bringing us up to date with such good news. And hello to all you Warren Democrats who are here with us this evening. It is so good to be with you in community tonight. And I am so glad that progressive champions like MJ Hegar and Adrian Perkins are going to be joining us for this conversation in just a couple of minutes. This is going to be really exciting. You know, I will get straight to the point. This is a moment of crisis for our nation. And across this country, the fight for social, racial, and economic justice wages on. As we fight for justice, we are also battling a global pandemic and an economy on the brink of collapse. The coronavirus has turned the world as we know it upside down. Over 6.5 million coronavirus cases now. Nearly 200,000 of our family and friends and loved ones have died from COVID-19. Black and brown communities are being infected and killed by this virus at alarming rates. And in times of crisis, government can be a powerful force for good if competence and moral clarity rule the day. Donald Trump's response to this crisis has been incompetent and morally bankrupt. And at every turn, he has fanned the flames of racism and bigotry. He has ignored the warnings that came before this pandemic. He has refused to lead. He has let thousands die. He has failed to meet this moment. But Donald Trump has not failed alone. No. Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have been right by his side. They have enabled corruption. They have emboldened Trump's ego, and they have eroded democracy since Donald Trump was sworn into office. And now, more than ever, we need new leadership. We need new voices. We need a new vision for our government to uplift working families and to build an America that doesn't just work for a handful of folks, but that works for everyone. So, Democrats, we got a job to do in less than 50 days. Beat Donald Trump and elect Joe Biden. But it is not enough to win the White House. We need to make sure we're doing everything in our power to take back the majority, to hang on to our majority in the House and to take back the Senate. And I'm just going to be blunt. We are not going to win the Senate if we don't support candidates like Adrian Perkins and MJ Hegar. When we win back the Senate, we must ensure that we are ready to fight for the kind of change needed to make our country work for everyone, not just for a handful of people. And that's why it's so important to elect candidates that are ready to tackle these challenges on the first day. So, Warren Democrats is proud to endorse candidates who understand the importance of changing our country's approach to some of our most pressing issues, from climate change to criminal justice to health care. People who have plans for how their states can meet this moment. So I am honored to join you today for this important conversation. So let's get started. MJ and Adrian, I've got a question in order to get us kicked off here. We have all seen how this pandemic has changed the way that candidates campaign. Nobody gets to do those face-to-face conversations like we used to be able to, and nobody gets to do all those selfies like we used to do, the things that are uniquely a part of running for office. So I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you've been closing that gap so that you really get a chance to connect with voters now that you've had to do this online. You know, MJ, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's so good to see you, Senator Warren. Thanks for having me today. It's been a challenge, but in the military, I flew rescue missions in Afghanistan, and we were taught that when you had an obstacle, you didn't just overcome it, you try to turn it to an advantage. And so we've taken this digital environment, and whereas we were driving tens of thousands of miles across this amazing and beautiful state, now we're virtually going tens of thousands of miles. We've been all over the state connecting with people in person and making those important relationships. And now that we're virtual, the virtual environment's actually a lot less intrusive and intimidating to persuadable voters who maybe are on the fence and who wouldn't have come out to an in-person event because that's a big time commitment and they have to plan their whole night around it, but they're willing to click on a town hall. Also, one of my favorite things to do, when you see people campaigning, a lot of times we're trying to uplift the stories of the people we hear on the trail. And we're like, I met this nurse in the Rio Grande Valley, or I met this postal worker talking about this. And this environment has really enabled me to have issue-based town halls where I'm actually able to invite those people and lift them up and help teach the public what the DACA program is and things like that. And so I believe we have done everything we could to turn this to an advantage. We've seen that result in the polls and in the grassroots momentum here in Texas. We're setting voter turnout records despite the COVID environment in a primary runoff electorate, which should be a very small electorate. We had 1 million people vote. Despite all the voter suppression in Texas and despite the very little vote by mail, people waiting hours in line in the middle of a pandemic in July in Texas to vote. And so we're very excited about what's happening here in Texas.
Good for you. It sounds like you've really met this head on, and sounds like you're actually having some fun doing all of this, which I'm very glad to see.
Fight for people.
Good for you, because that's what it's about. Adrienne, how about you? How's this affected you, and what have you done to respond?
Yeah, very similar ways, Senator. But first of all, thanks so much for having me on. Very happy to be with you. And also is happy to be here with MJ as well. And thank you for your service, MJ. I have a similar background and coming from the military. And what we've identified is there are pros and cons to operating in a COVID environment. The pros is that I can hop around the state on Zoom calls pretty quickly. I've done, town halls with chambers of commerce in Lake Charles or Lafayette, and then jumped over to talk to donors in New Orleans or Baton Rouge in a matter of minutes. And in a non-COVID environment, that wouldn't be really acceptable. So we really leverage technology as best as we can. And as we go out into the states, primarily on the weekends, I'm still the mayor of a city, we are making sure that people are outside, that people are wearing face masks, that we're really prioritizing public health since we are in the middle of a pandemic. In order for me to be the leader that Louisiana deserves, we gotta be responsible on the campaign trail as well. So it's been pros and cons to it, but our message is catching wind, and people are hearing about us all around the state, and they're excited.
Good for you.
And Mr. Mayor, I'll start with you, and then go to MJ. We've seen a lot of the Republican candidates really either enable or excuse the Trump administration's corruption, and I just wanted to see from your time as mayor, and then what both of you are planning to do to tackle corruption and campaign finance reform if and when you're elected to the Senate.
Yeah, and my opponent, Senator Cassidy, is definitely one of those leading the charge to insulate the president from any kind of responsibility. But yeah, overall, to fight corruption in Washington, D.C., I think we started with action on our campaign. And that action was to not to accept any corporate PAC dollars. So we've, again, just, kind of virtue signaled out to those that are following our campaign. But once in the Senate, we need to fight to pass legislation to turn around what Citizens United ruled in the courts. We don't have to wait on the courts to rule on it again. Us as legislators, we can take action to that to prevent as much money that we've seen that floods into our elections. And I'll say I'm from a low-income household. A single mother raised me and my two older brothers. She made about $38,000 a year. It is difficult to impossible for someone with that kind of background to make it into our political process. And that's not right. I know the values that my mother have and that a lot of other working class people have out there. And we can't have a true democracy until we lower the financial barriers that are there.
Yeah. Good for you, because you're exactly right about this. This is one of the reasons I'm excited to have you in this race and to see you move forward. I think we're going to have a real opportunity to attack corruption head on. I think the American people have had enough of this. And Donald Trump, it was bad enough before, but Donald Trump has pushed this to such levels now, and you're right. About your opponent on this. So good for you that you're in this. How about you, MJ? How are you looking at this as an issue going forward?
Yeah, people keep asking me, like, what are my top issues? What are, the things that I'm passionate about? And I always start with this because while healthcare is the most important thing to talk about in Texas, and climate change is my personal most important issue for our species and for our country and our national security, our economy, and our planet, we can't get the action we need on healthcare healthcare, immigration, climate change, gun safety, until we end Citizens United. And I think it may take a constitutional amendment, and that's something I'm going to be fighting for. End Citizens United is actually the first endorsement I got on my Senate campaign. It was the day after I announced, because they actually came to me on my congressional last cycle and said, we've noticed every time you get a microphone, you're talking about ending Citizens United and ending corruption, and maybe we should partner together. And so it's something that I'm very passionate about. When I came to DC to open hundreds of thousands of jobs for women in the military, I was told there was no chance I was going to be successful because I wasn't a big corporate donor and I didn't have any political capital. And I was still able to build a broad bipartisan coalition, but it wasn't easy because of the corruption. My opponent is the perfect example of why that corruption is so bad. Specifically with corporate PAC money, he received so much money from the private detention centers that are profiting off of the humanitarian crisis and the broken immigration system. So he has consistently voted against bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform and keeping that program, keeping our policies broken so that his corporate donors can maximize their profits and be at max capacity, which is disgusting to me. And it really hobbles our ability to be the leaders of the free world and be able to lecture people like China on their human rights violations of the Uyghurs. We've got to maintain that credibility and stand for the values that our country was founded on. He receives so much money from the gun lobby, and then 80% of Texans want universal background checks, and still our own senators won't support it because of that. So I believe that the corrupting factor of corporate money in politics is why our government is so dysfunctional. Not only does it make some of our legislators legislate for profit margins instead of for working families, but it also creates this gridlock of hyper-partisanship. Because it's really difficult. I would feel bad for Senator Cornyn if his policies weren't so damaging to my state, because he's in a position where he has to look like he's serving his constituents, actually serve his corporate donors and their profit margins and protect their interests, and also take his marching orders from Mitch McConnell. And it's very difficult to serve those three masters, and so we're the ones that get the short end of the stick.
Yeah, boy, you have got that one nailed exactly right. Anything else we want to do, we've got to be willing to take on the corruption in order to get it done. So in fact, let me just ask about that, because in the last few years, both Texas and Louisiana have been directly hit by climate change, unprecedented flooding, devastating storms, and yet Republicans in the Senate haven't given your states the necessary support to recover or to address this crisis. So let me start this time with you, MJ. What's your plan to tackle climate change head on and to get the relief that Texas needs?
I've got a plan for that, Senator Warren.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Way to go, MJ.
We have to have a plan because we're Texas. I mean, nearly 10% of our economy is in the energy industry. And as I'm talking to workers in Southeast Texas and the Permian Basin, they want to have jobs. They want to be able to put food on the table for their kids. And they feel this real, conflict because they also feel like they go to work every day and they're destroying the planet that they're handing their kids. And so, I really think that too often people overlook, climate change itself is an existential threat to our children, but there is also, the Pentagon has listed it as one of our top national security threats. So as a veteran, I take national security threats seriously. And in Texas, it's an economic threat. In Texas, through the executive MBA that I got from UT taught me, among other things, that you cannot be a leader in business if you are going to hold on with both hands to the antiquated technology that made you successful last decade or last century. And that's what's happening in the Texas energy industry. Right now, we lead the nation. But if we're going to continue leading the nation, if we're going to protect jobs, which, by the way, we've already lost over 60,000 jobs in the energy industry this year, and we were in an economic crisis with the oil industry before COVID-19 because Saudi Arabia and Russia were flooding the market. So I would really like the Texas economy to not be dependent on the actions of countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia. I want to continue leading in the energy industry. And if we're going to do that, we have to center energy workers in that transition. They have the expertise, they have the understanding, they have the clarity of, energy production and not just profit margins like the CEOs that John Cornyn listens to. When I talk to them, they see the writing on the wall. We want their input in creating energy jobs instead of constantly losing them. And we need to recognize that communities of color, especially in Texas, are on the front line of this crisis. They're already disproportionately experiencing the effects of this crisis and from other environmental crises because we tend to put plants that spew toxicity into lower, economically disadvantaged communities and communities of color. They're also the last to get hurricane relief and support. So the bottom line is we need to set aggressive goals for the expansion of clean renewable energy. If we want to continue leading and not let China lead in renewable energy, we need to invest in clean energy manufacturing and sustainable transportation. We have to modernize our energy grid with infrastructure investments to make sure that it's equipped to handle the increased load during peak usage. And like I said, I think that the key is to center our energy workers in this broad coalition of stakeholders that we bring together in order to use their energy expertise as we pave the path forward.
Yeah, Texas needs you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm really tired of watching the corporations do great while my fellow Texans and neighbors are suffering.
Yep.
All right, so I'll jump in now.
I was going to say, I thought Scott was going to bump in.
Yeah, I thought so.
I was pausing, but it's okay, Adrian. MJ has talked about the devastating effects of climate change, but let's face it, Louisiana sure has been no stranger to this. It's seen more than its share of natural disasters as a result of climate change. So do talk to us about this, Adrian, and talk to us a little bit about how you frame the issue and how you plan to tackle it. Go ahead. I want to hear from you on this.
Well, I'll say that the future senator of Texas just described the economic way forward in a much better way than I could. I was redundant to talk about that. But I can talk about the impact that it's had on my state as of late. And Louisiana is no different. As a matter of fact, my brother works in the oil and gas industry. My father works in the oil and gas industry. And my brother has been laid off. We have lost so many jobs even before COVID-19 because it's a very volatile industry. And we think of it very singularly here. I agree with MJ in saying that, hey, we have to retrofit our economy, not to just be focused on fossil fuels, but to be focused on renewable energy resources too, so that we can keep people at work. It's a way that we can respect our energy sector within our economy, but also be responsible for the environment as well and take care of future generations to come. What we're seeing right now, the impact on our current generation. Louisiana just got hit with the 4th most powerful storm to ever hit the United States in Hurricane Laura. Hurricane Laura made it to Shreveport. We are 4 hours from the coast. They made it to Shreveport still as a Category 1 hurricane. And we had to prepare for that as a community. It wiped out our power grid where 90,000 homes were without power. That's people that are on respirators, people that need medical equipment to be functioning, a lot of our seniors without generators so that they can have the things that they need. Unfortunately, we got our grid back up pretty quickly over about 5 days, and we didn't have any loss of life. But Lake Charles to this day still looks like a war zone. We need FEMA to be in there helping out. But if you think about it, how many of these storms can we take? We were just hit this morning. New Orleans was just swiped by Hurricane Sally. I think Alabama and Mississippi took the brunt of it. But it's 4 of the hurricanes out there in the Atlantic right now, and we don't know where they're going to go. We are seeing storms and these storms of the century happen every other year. As a mayor, I can tell you one of the things that kept me up at night for the first 4 months of my administration was the rain, because we got a year's worth of rainfall in 4 months. What it did was it damaged our infrastructure. It flooded our river. It flooded our neighborhoods. And as already was pointed out, minority neighborhoods took the brunt of it. This is something that we cannot wait on any longer. Denying it is just out of the window. And my opponent hasn't even addressed it. He hadn't got us the resources we need. And again, he's just marched to the party drum the entire time he's been in the Senate.
Yeah, well, Louisiana needs you and America needs you. In fact, the earth needs both of you. As we know, this one hits locally and you talk with real passion about how it affects your home states. But our solution has got to be global, and we're going to work together on that. You know, I want to ask you about one other issue, and that is, you know, one of the things that's weighing heavily on our democracy is voter suppression. It is the oldest tool in the Republican playbook, and the pandemic has only made their efforts more evident and more obscene. So what should voters be doing to make sure that their voices get heard in this election? Adrian, I've been starting with MJ. Would you like to start this one?
Yeah, I will jump in gladly because it's a huge day in Louisiana when talking about voter suppression. Our governor sued our Secretary of State for an inadequate voting plan, and we won today. So we're extremely happy in Louisiana.
Woohoo!
Hoping that the Republicans get the message that they cannot toy around with this, with our voting here in Louisiana. But we've seen blatant undermining of our voting system over the last couple of weeks to a degree that I couldn't have imagined. You know, a direct attack on our U.S. Postal Service that wasn't just trying to take the legitimacy away from them, but what it did, it acutely affected our seniors in our communities that depended on checks that are on fixed income. It acutely affected the veteran community that depend on medication from the VA. And again, my opponent was completely quiet about it. With voter suppression, this is what we're telling Louisianians across the state. And I've talked to several of our Democratic parish executive committees about this, who sit on the board of the voter registrars within their respective parish. You know, parishes or counties for those out there that are listening. Louisiana's a little different. But we've told them, hey, you gotta beat the message home to make sure people know to first have the will to vote, because they're trying to take it away from you. If it wasn't valuable, they wouldn't be trying to take it away from you. First, have the will to vote. And next, vote as quickly as possible, as soon in the cycle as possible, so that your vote is counted this November. And with that message out there, again, the Republicans can try all the tools that they want, but they know the avalanche of blue that's headed their way.
Yeah, that's really powerful. MJ, you want to add in on this?
Yeah, you know, I think I have veterans have somewhat of a unique perspective, especially those of us that have served in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and other countries where people put their lives on the line to be able to vote. And people, you know, when I was flying medevac in Afghanistan during election season, we knew we were going to pick up people whose your thumb is blue when you vote, because you do a thumbprint, and we picked up people missing thumbs that the Taliban had targeted for voting, who were killed, you know. And so when somebody tells me I'm going to vote for you, I feel an immediate weight on my shoulders that I'm grateful for, that makes me know what it's a burden, but in a good way. I have to think of a better word for it, but it's definitely, it's a centering moment for me where I'm like, well, then I better get back to work, because your vote is something very precious. And so, you know, we have a long history of voter suppression in Texas as well as Louisiana. And COVID, of course, is no different. Before COVID, 34 states across the country were able to do no excuse vote by mail. And now, after COVID, with certain states relaxing restrictions, Texas is one of only 6 states that hasn't relaxed vote by mail restrictions. And so the good news is, because we're setting voter turnout records and people are showing that they're still willing to stand in line for hours to vote despite the pandemic, and because Biden is doing so well in Texas and we have 38 electoral votes, I'm hoping our 38 electoral votes are going to contribute to a more stable environment after this election. Because if Biden is sitting on California and Texas while we wait for some of these other states to report the results, it's going to be very hard for Donald Trump to challenge those results and to sow division. And so I'm working really hard to make sure that that happens here in Texas. I was raised to believe that, if any state can do something, Texas can do it better. And so I hold Governor Abbott and our other elected officials accountable to that, and say, if other states can do it, why can't Texas figure it out? If they can figure it out and do it safely and securely, then we should be able to also. And I don't know if y'all in the audience have ever met a Texan, but if you try to intimidate us or scare us out of doing something, all it does is motivate us to want to do it more. So I have every faith that the voters across Texas are going to come to the ballot box this November. An early vote starts in like 3.5 weeks. And so this October and November, they're going to come to the ballot box. We are trying to recruit poll workers, and so that we can try to shorten the lines and make sure that people are voting with CDC guidelines, make sure that we're being as safe as possible. There's so much that we need to do that we probably don't even have time to talk about right now. Things like online registration, making Election Day a holiday. The Voting Rights Act, of course, is something that we need to pass. But the bottom line is that the people who are empowered now in Texas are really hoping that we are too scared to vote. And they are counting on intimidating and scaring in order to not be held accountable for their failures and their fumbled handling of this pandemic. Yeah. But Texans have a very sensitive BS meter, and when we've had enough, and we have certainly had enough, then Texas turn out in force. Our democracy is so much healthier and stronger and more secure the more people take part in it. So everybody who's watching right now is either in Texas or knows someone in Texas. Call that person, make sure that they realize that there's an election going on. And I don't, that's not a joke. People really have full plates right now. I've got 2 small kids at home trying to do virtual kindergarten. People are losing their jobs. People are worried about their health. Everybody has very full plates right now. And so we have to remind everyone that there's an election. We have to make sure everybody knows whether or not they're registered, doesn't get kicked off the voter polls, has the correct ID, and gets out to the polls and votes.
That's right. Make a plan and vote.
That's right.
And if I could say one other thing on this, just briefly, but MJ and her team in the DSCC, we've won a couple big voting rights cases in Texas recently. Making it possible to register to vote online, which the powers that be were preventing, and making it much easier for people to get registered online. It was a big victory for our side just a couple weeks back.
Yep. Powerfully important stuff. So staying after this. So Scott and I got a few questions from supporters, and I'm going to start by reading one from Stephen. It addresses an issue in general we've already talked about, but I thought we might do this. So here's what Stephen had to say. As a former resident of New Orleans and Houston, I've witnessed the firsthand effects of climate change up close. If elected, you will be U.S. senators from 2 states which are so vulnerable to hurricanes, flooding, coastal erosion. What kind of policies and legislation would you support to combat this? So we talk generally about climate change and the importance of it. How about, just to keep things moving along, name one thing you'd really like to do that you think would be helpful to your state on the climate front, or on the preparation for what happens. Adrian, you want to start?
Yeah, I will. The one piece of legislation that I think we need to push is an infrastructure bill. A couple years ago, under the Obama administration, the EPA and DOJ issued consent decrees in various cities. My city is under consent decree right now that's costing us, for our water and sewer, sub-service surface infrastructure that's costing us about $800 million over the life of this project. That is a huge bill for a municipality, and we aren't getting any support from the federal government. So it's pretty much an unfunded mandate. I think in an infrastructure bill, there should be dollars allocated to municipalities so that we can make sure that we have infrastructure that has water pumps, so we can deal with the flooding, that has sufficient infrastructure to deal with the extreme weather events that we're seeing year in and year out. And right now, cities are struggling to fit those bills, especially in a timeline and dealing with the storms that we're seeing. And I think that's a bit of a stopgap. So over the long term, as we, become carbon neutral, that we'll be able to at least have our cities prepared and retrofitted to deal with the extreme weather that we're experiencing.
Good. I want to go to you a sec here, MJ, but I just want to support what you're saying on this, Adrienne, because it's right now, we've got an economy that is on a real downward spiral. High unemployment and a lot of small businesses that are not going to reopen, a lot of big businesses that have closed permanently or are laying off people, state and local government that are about to do layoffs. We need to be getting more money into the economy. And one way we could be doing that over a longer arc is we should be putting more money into developing our infrastructure. And you're exactly right. Hardening it against climate change, new infrastructure where we need it, upgrading infrastructure to meet new challenges from flooding and the like.
I can go on and on. I talk about the infrastructure bill a lot. I talk about we need to be putting broadband in the ground so that these children right now that are forced to be doing virtual learning, who don't have access to broadband internet, so that they can be equipped just like their peers are. And we know that children in urban areas and rural areas are disproportionately affected by the lack of internet access. So, we're actually not even educating our children. There's also healthcare implications. Telehealth is going to be the future of healthcare. And right now, a lot of our seniors in rural areas, like my grandmother, she doesn't have access to that. So she has to get in her car and begrudgingly drive into the big city of Shreveport to get her health care. And there's a lot that we can do with the infrastructure bill, and it can very much be boosting our economy and creating jobs on the opposite side of COVID-19.
I like that. How about you, MJ? What's one thing you did?
Yeah, it's definitely infrastructure, but I just want to touch on something that I mentioned before, which is modernizing the grid so that we can handle peak load on renewable energy. So one of the things that I have found is really disturbing is the trend when politicians want to privatize something or watch out for the interests of their corporate donors. One of the things that they'll do is sabotage something to make it fail. They will starve the VA or the Postal Service or whatever of resources. And I want to make sure that they don't do the same thing to make renewable energy fail by not allowing us to modernize our grid, because in order for the grid to handle that peak load on renewable energy, we have to modernize it. So I would say also, yes, infrastructure is definitely it. And broadband is definitely an issue out here in Texas. I did serve in the military, but I also worked for 5 years in healthcare, and getting healthcare out to rural areas was certainly a challenge. And one of the ways that we need to do that is through telemedicine, because it's hard enough to even get general practice or trauma services out into rural areas, let alone some of the specialists that you need to be able to see for certain diseases or diagnoses. And so broadband is certainly something that's critical. I just want to mention that, I flew a wildfire support in California, and seeing the impact of climate change on our country. I also flew hurricane recovery during Ike. I just visited in Texas, pulling people off of their roofs in the middle of that in 2008. Recently visited the Rio Grande Valley and saw firsthand how communities are struggling in the wake of Hurricane Hannah. We just passed the 3-year anniversary of Hurricane Harvey, which was responsible for 88 deaths and caused $125 billion in damages. And Houstonians are still waiting for help and still struggling to rebuild. And I mentioned that communities of color disproportionately get that help, or disproportionately do not get that help. And so I'm a big accountability, transparency person in everything. And so I would also like to see a little bit more accountability and transparency in whether it's COVID relief or FEMA relief or anything on where that money's going, and making sure that those decisions are being made at the right level, and that local officials are empowered to help their communities recover.
November 3rd, that's what accountability is all about, right? Both of you are running against incumbent Republicans who need to be held accountable on every vote they have taken and on the votes they have failed to take because they've helped Mitch McConnell keep us from bringing legislation to the floor. Scott, I think you've got the last question.
Yeah, so Catherine wrote in with a great question. I'll start with you, MJ, and then we'll go to Mayor Perkins. What's the biggest thing we can do to help swing these southern red states? How to get them into the blue wave? What's the best way for people to help with that, MJ?
So Adrian and I don't take corporate PAC money. Unfortunately, I don't know about Louisiana, but Texas is a very expensive state where our average online donation is $23. And we've raised millions of dollars throughout the course of this campaign, but also millions just in the last couple months. But I'm fighting against John Cornyn's Coke Network and the gun lobby and the private detention centers. And so donations are critical. Calling people that you know and asking them to throw us $20 is critical. You can get onto our website, mjfortexas.com, and click on get involved and be part of our digital organizing team that's phone banking and texting and doing a lot of socially distanced field work. And I always say, and I think I've already mentioned it today, but I'll say it again, someone in Texas. And so pick up the phone and call that person and tell them to go vote and tell them to bring 5 people with them. And thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks, MJ.
Yeah, and I'll just say that within 24 hours after we announced, we had people in over 30 parishes. It's 64 parishes here in Louisiana. We had people in over 30 parishes making those small dollar donations and contributing to our campaign, pushing us forward. We just announced about 5 weeks ago, so we have not yet hit the $1 million mark, but we're right there. And I know that everybody that's tuned in, even if you don't know anybody in Louisiana, you know how harmful Bill Cassidy has been, not just to us, but to everybody. I mean, his trademark piece of legislation that luckily failed was the Graham Cassidy bill that would have stripped away health care from 500,000 Louisianians and stripped it away from 23 million Americans. We cannot afford, none of us, not just Louisianians, but America cannot afford to give him another 6 years in the Senate because there's no telling what kind of harm he would try to do at that time. So yeah, please contribute to our campaign. Go to perkinsforla.com, and that's the way that we're moving forward. And just in over a month, we're still out raising any other candidate in the race. And obviously my opponent is taking money from pharmaceutical companies, the gun lobby, you name it. Everybody that has been, those special interest groups that are doing harm to our environment, literally and figuratively, he's in their pocket. And that's why he has about $6 million on hand right now. And he's able to stay up on TV and you name it. But again, as people hear about us, we are winning them over. So the more donations that we get, the more we can jump on TV and we can contest the crazy commercials that he's running about supporting the military, but not saying anything to the president as he talks crazy about the military and various things like that. So it's very much a blue wave going on down here. We just need to make sure that the dollars match the energy that is in Louisiana right now.
And Catherine, one more thing I want to say on your question is part of the way we win in red states, and this is, we recruit military veterans to run. Candidates like MJ and Adrian Perkins, they can overperform Joe Biden's number. They can overperform at the top of the ticket because voters value military veterans, and I think they're gonna overperform the top of the ticket in some of these redder and purpler states because of their military service. Voters will recognize and appreciate that. So. Folks, I'll turn it back to Senator Warren, but I wanted to thank everybody for getting on, and Senator Warren, you and your team and all the awesome work you've been doing to help us flip the Senate. Folks can see here how to volunteer and donate directly for Mayor Perkins in Louisiana and for MJ Hegar in Texas. They've both been endorsed by the DSCC. We've been helping raise money for them. Senator Warren's been helping raise money for them, and helping with field remotely and helping with voter protection remotely is something folks can do. And really appreciate everybody jumping on. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Senator Warren.
So thank you very much. Thanks, Scott, for being here. MJ, it's good to hear from you. Adrian, good to hear from you in this. This is terrific. Anyone who wants to help, please go to elizabethwarren.com. We've got all the paths for you to get in. and to be able to volunteer money, phone calls, help in any way. You know, these are two people you had a chance to meet tonight, and I'm glad you got to meet them because this is our future. That's what's on the ballot come November 3rd. What kind of a nation are we going to be? And we've got two terrific people here who want to help us build that nation, who've put their own lives on the line to get out there and fight for it. So they want to have our backs. The best way we can make that happen is to have their backs. So thank you all for being with us tonight. And to everyone who's in this fight, persist. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all. Thanks.
Bye.
Stay safe.